very much. Right, it's time for Head to Head.
Head to Head.
Well, joining us this morning, I'm delighted to say Sophia Worringer, who is new to our panel. Very good morning to you. And also Jonathan Liss, who has splendid yellow trousers on.
And unfortunately, I didn't even see them.
No, you can't. What a shame.
What a shame.
Lovely to see
Very
you.
70s.
That's just my vibe all over.
Is that right?
Yeah.
You're not old enough, are you?
No, of course not, David.
No. Are you, Renee? Right, OK, let's start. There are lots of stories. I am going to desist from talking about the rail strikes, but there is a lead story in the Telegraph this morning which I just thought was really, really interesting. And this is that India is waging a diplomatic campaign to reclaim the Koh-i-Noor diamond and thousands of other treasures from Britain in what they call a reckoning with the colonial past. Now, clearly this is of newsworthy value because, of course, we've had the coronation. The Koh-i-Noor diamond was removed from the crown. I think it was the Queen Mary crown. And so essentially the officials in New Delhi are trying to repatriate all of these things that were taken by other countries during the time, obviously, of the empire. And it got me thinking this morning just in terms of what the best thing to do is. And I don't know if you have a view on that, Sophia. Should we give everything back?
Well, I think the key word that you've said there is taken, and I think these jewels actually weren't.
Some were gifts.
Taken, exactly. The diamond was a gift, and it was part of a treaty made with the East India Company. So I think whatever these discussions, what direction they take, I think it's important to have them amicably, and no one should be demanding anything, because no one alive now is responsible for what happened when they were exchanged, taken, whatever word you want to use. And so I think it's important that those conversations are amicable and not about guilt.
No, OK, so let's say if we took, not just us, but if a colonial power took something, do we give it back? And if it was a gift, we keep it?
I think it's all part of just a discussion. I don't think there's a black and white answer. I know Modi is very keen to push his kind of nationalist agenda, and part of that is moving away from colonial rule, and obviously there's lots of positives in that, but I think it is more nuanced because these collections often have to be kept together. And I know, for example, in the Elgin marbles with the British Museum, they actually have legislation that means they can't just give them back.
Indeed, that's right.
So it's a lot more complicated than has been presented sometimes.
Jonathan, where do you... I imagine, I think I know what you're going to say, but just where do you stand on this? Because Sophia's right. Actually, you can't just repatriate these. You do have to go through Parliament for many of these historic artefacts. But also, what about this idea that if they were requisitioned, is that different from a gift?
I think there is a difference between something that was plundered, you know, as Sophia said, something that was taken, stolen, effectively, and something that was given. But even things that were given might have been given, you know, under difficult circumstances. You know, a lot of loot was given to the British in exchange for, say, sparing certain people or palaces, or asking for help against, you know, in other sort of battles that were taking place at the time. Things that might not be recognised as a kind of purely gift, you know, sort of a pure gift now. And I think that it has to be seen in the broader context of a kind of post-colonial relationship, and Britain also facing up to a role in the world that is different from the role in the world that it had before. And, you know, you can see it from Britain's perspective about, you know, sort of the need to have this sort of, you know, unequalled sort of collection at the British Museum, and how we need to present the entire world to the world. But from India's perspective, you know, there is a lot of anger and distress about, you know, what they see as their heritage and birthright.
Is there, though? Or is this a political game? Because Modi...
it is both those things. Yeah, obviously it's both those things. I'm no defender of Modi.
No,
let me be quite clear about that.
I've spent a lot of time in India, and so Modi is very much on a mission. You know, he's teaching Hindi back in schools as opposed to actually teaching English as the primary language. And of course, remember, India is a massive country, and of course contributes a great deal. I would also argue, actually, Modi goes on to talk about the fact that their colonial past has actually oppressed them. Now, that is true to a degree, but actually the empire did provide infrastructure, particularly railways, and I'm very struck by that when I'm over in India.
I think also they're quite good at oppressing themselves, the Indian. You know, they did have a hideous caste system. system, which a lot of
It's a
people
very good
still,
point.
which really did oppress many people. I think I agree with Jonathan, which I know is unusual. We don't always, but I agree. I think it's very nuanced, and I think if things were actually stolen, they should be given back. I mean, I even feel the Elgin marbles, really, despite the law, should actually probably
Should we have taken the Koh-i-Noor diamond out of the Queen Mary crown for the coronation?
No, I don't think we should. But I also feel that diamond actually has a history that goes back much farther than India, and you could even question how India got that diamond. So I think it's nuanced. There needs to be discussions, and every single item needs to be looked at individually. There's no one rule, I think.
That's it's just fascinating. It just got me thinking this morning. Let's move on and talk about Eurovision. Super excited about Eurovision. The final, obviously, I won't be able to watch it because I'll be in sleep, as you better be. But just in terms of Eurovision, obviously a lot has been talked about Zelensky, and he wants to speak at Eurovision tonight. Now, 160 million people, I think more than that, will watch the Eurovision final. Now, the EBU, which is the group that's responsible for organising it, have said they're refusing to let Zelensky speak, saying it's an apolitical contest, and I understand that. But equally, they ban Russia. So what's your feeling on what Zelensky should or should not be allowed to do?
I think it's impossible for this event to not be political. I think there's 11 Ukrainian contestants that are going to be competing, and they will definitely be making reference to what's happening in Ukraine, and that will be coming through in their performances, in their costumes, in their commentary around the event. It's impossible for it not to be political. And I think it's also interesting that this line has been taken that we need to be impartial. And I understand that there is a duty to keep entertainment away from the day-to-day cut and thrust of domestic politics, but I would say, in my opinion, this is not a question of impartiality when you're facing an illegal invasion. It's not about bringing in both sides of the story. It's about an invasion of a country that is completely illegal, and I do think Zelensky should be allowed to speak.
Do you? And how would you do that? Live, or would you have a pre-record so you actually know what he's going to say?
I would say pre-record and maybe separate it from the rest of the performances, because obviously the situation in Ukraine is very serious, very dire,
exactly.
and the performances are fairly light-hearted for entertainment. But I wonder if it's possible for him to do a pre-record that then precedes the event, and then it goes straight into the entertainment.
As
so
we would call a pre-title tease. So you have a pre-recorded message where he says, "Thank you to the United Kingdom for hosting on behalf of Ukraine because we're not in a position to do so." Would you be happy with that?
Yeah, I really don't disagree with anything that Sophia's just said. And actually, if you look at previous Eurovisions, sort of prime ministers and presidents have given out the award at the end, for example. I think, in fact, I remember the previous president of Ukraine, Yushchenko, doing that when Ukraine hosted it many years ago after the Orange Revolution. And these things are always political anyway. We have to, accept that Eurovision is an intensely political
well, we
event.
were saying that even those countries vote for each other.
Of course. But the fundamental point is, it's happening in Liverpool for a reason. That reason is political. I think it has to be acknowledged. And, if you are going to have a recognition of that, a very easy way is to have the president of the country that should be hosting it giving a speech and acknowledging the reasons why the country can't host it, which is the fact that it's been invaded by another country.
I think we're all agreed on that. But as Renée makes You're not.
Agree. I don't think he should be speaking. I think it's an entertainment
What about that bit that we've decided that now we're running it, that he is going to speak before it actually starts?
Yeah, well, I think if we do that, I think we should play it at the end, not at the beginning.
No.
But
no one will be watching it then.
Yeah, exactly.
Once you know who's won and got glitter.
I just think we should leave the few things that we have left that people enjoy as entertainment events. And I think it's a completely different, having Zelensky's speech, and we know how political it will be, having Zelensky speak is very different to having the president of the country that's hosting it present the prize at the end. It's an entirely different thing.
Of course it's different, but politics does get involved in this context, sort of in different ways, and I think we have to acknowledge the unique nature of this.
There will be no doubt in the competition tonight why it's there. No one will be left.
Also, it's going to be mentioned, isn't it? I mean,
exactly.
Come on. And also, I think the organisers are worried about that. Also, I just wonder why Rishi Sunak's weighing in, Boris Johnson's wading in, Keir Starmer's wading in.
Because it's good, but because obviously every politician wants to sort of emphasise their credentials, their pro-Ukraine bona fides, and that's.
But wouldn't it be great if one of the leaders said, "This is not the time or place, but we fully support Ukraine"?
Yes.
Wouldn't that be a good thing?
Yeah, I mean, I've just seen a flag. I've just seen a flag that's been made up that is half the Union Jack and half the Ukrainian flag.
There's
no one is going to be in any doubt this evening.
Right, let's move on and talk about Brexit, my favourite subject. We were promised a bonfire of Brexit laws, 4,800. Kemi Badenoch has managed to get rid of 600, which is less of a bonfire. What did we describe it as?
It's just a bit of tinder burning, isn't it, in the corner?
Tinder burning in the garden.
Sounds like my Saturday night.
I don't wish to know. I mean, interestingly, she was berated by the Speaker for not actually announcing this to the Commons, and had a written... It was in the newspaper and then a written statement, and quite rightly, he told her off. But what I find really interesting is that Tory MPs, and this is one of their headlines, is some Conservative MPs, particularly the ERG, are so angry they are now threatening to oust yet another unelected Prime Minister.
Well, I do think that's slightly ridiculous, and I think even senior members of the ERG have said, whoa, let's just calm down slightly and let's take stock, and we're not at the letters stage yet. And let's be honest, there is not the appetite to oust the Prime Minister. I think...
How many do we need?
Well, and according to the Express...
Three a year,
yeah.
But according to the Express yesterday, they are at the letter stage, and 40 letters have gone in.
I don't believe it.
Nonsense.
And so just in terms of where we are, do you take... I don't know where you stand on this. Do you think that the government... I mean, Rishi Sunak, that was one of his pledges, and he's not been true to his pledge, and that got him that position, and he has failed.
I agree. I don't think it's great for the Prime Minister when he's setting himself up as someone who delivers and keeps his promises. I do think he needs to carry through on this. And the whole point of a sunset clause is that it puts pressure on people to achieve something by a certain date. And removing that pressure, when will these EU regulations actually be replaced? If there's no sunset clause, I just don't think they will ever be replaced.
Well, they don't want them replaced, and that's the civil service. Do you think it's?
Yes.
Do you think it's? Right, I'll come to you in a second. Is it the civil service?
Well, this is what Jacob Rees-Mogg has said, right?
Indeed.
He says lazy civil servants. I mean, I wouldn't quite go that far. I don't think they're necessarily lazy, but there's ways they can drag their feet.
Well, Kemi Badenoch called them the blob.
She did. There's ways that they can make it difficult. And, for example, the Ministry of Justice has done 60% of it already, and obviously this was under the former Secretary of State for Justice, Dominic Raab, and he was pushing that agenda because he was very committed to it personally. But I think that there is actually a kind of idea that we can slow this down and then we can push it into the long grass, and eventually no one will ask about it, because it is fairly technical.
It is.
And I don't think the majority of the public really understand it.
No, so is the counter-argument then that actually it does need to be done slowly, because it's so difficult to disentwine all of these laws which have been made and put onto statute over a long period of time? Is that where you're going to come from? It's actually far more complicated than saying we're going to burn the whole lot.
Of course it's complicated. I mean, these are...
But he promised, Jonathan.
That was stupid. And that was stupid, and it was dishonest, and they should never have done that. And what we have time and time again throughout this whole 7-year process is Conservative prime ministers sort of, making undeliverable promises to their base to whip them up into a frenzy about all the ways in which the EU is bad and evil, how we're going to rid ourselves from it, and then climbing down inevitably when it turns out things are rather more complicated and nuanced than they first appeared to be. Now, obviously, I think it's completely reasonable that since we've left the European Union, we should look at all the laws we've inherited from the European Union and see if we want to retain them, see if they add value. Now, obviously, if there's going to be any Brexit benefit, then, we want to see what it is, and if there's a law that we can do without or a law that we can do better, then let's hear it. But let's actually do that job properly, no matter how long it takes. I'm so tired of these endless, arbitrary, artificial deadlines that were sort of put in place by Conservative prime ministers only to sort of, to paralyse the country effectively and the civil service for no reason other than a deadline had to be made to satisfy the Telegraph and the Mail. Let's just do it properly over a course of years where people can look at the technical, so the chemicals that are required for this particular regulation. Do we need it? What can we do better? And let's have it done that way. Obviously, there can be a longer term deadline, but I just don't think it's good politics and good for the country to have a deadline after which laws we might not even know we needed cease to be in existence.
Surely the point is that we were promised this, we should do it, we have the sunset clause. Any of those laws that we think are good, we then just reinsert. No?
Yeah, I think it's possible to do it carefully and properly, but still with a tight deadline, and really put the force of the civil service expertise behind it. And I do think that it is important for the Prime Minister to deliver on what he has promised, because he's setting himself up as this delivery Prime Minister. And
well, that's the problem. He isn't, actually. That's the problem, really. Yeah. He's not what he claims to be. He's not a good politician. He's not good at delivering. He's a junior minister who found himself at the right place, the right time repeatedly, and now
he's a middle manager.
He's a middle manager. He's a middle manager.
But what do middle managers do? They usually deliver, right? They may not have the vision.
And they blame other people for their mistakes. But I'm so tired of people. I'm tired of people blaming the civil service for their political mistakes.
But is he a visionary?
He hasn't set himself up as a visionary. He's set himself up as a deliverer, competent. He's set himself up as a manager, and so has Keir Starmer, really. That's this competence battle that's going on at the moment, rather than the vision battle. And I think that's why it's so important that the Prime Minister delivers on what he says, because that's his whole
what this
reason.
Actually all comes back to, and you make the right point, Jonathan, is about time. They could have started this process in 2017, and they would have had plenty of time for somebody to be working their way through the laws, not dumping...
That's reasonable. I mean, in defence, they had a few other things to deal with at that time, such as negotiating how to withdraw from the European Union. But, I just don't see why. Look, this is a very, very long process. We were in the European Union for a long time. It took a long time to get out of the European Union. I don't see why there's this massive rush. Nobody cares about this on the doorstep. Absolutely nobody.
Jacob Rees-Mogg said he could do it in a weekend.
Also,
well, he didn't though. He was a minister in charge. He could have said, right, we're going to get rid of them all in the weekend, but he didn't, because he's all mouth and no trousers.
And what about IDS, who said we need to use the Parliament Act? Because actually one of the problems is the House of Lords. I mean, keeping going with all the amendments isn't the problem. Actually, we're running out of parliamentary time anyway, and then IDS says use the Parliament Act to force it through.
I think the government is slightly using the procedural things as an excuse, and the Parliament Act obviously means you can override the Lords with certain conditions, and two of those conditions are that the Lords has blocked it in 2 consecutive sessions. So it
takes time.
Exactly, and it would skew a lot of the other in 2 sessions in order to do that. So I do think it's not quite as simple, but there is often, it's easy to blame the procedure and to fall back on that blame, and that I think is what the government is.
I mean, I just wonder how the electorate's going to take this. I think fairly badly, and Brexit's
no one will notice, David. Not even Brexit will notice.
I disagree. I don't think that's playing well. But anyway, we ought to... Do you have a view? No?
I actually think that there are more important things on the minds of the electorate at the moment than this.
I would agree.
I think that we can, be angry about it, and I think we have rights to be angry about it. But I think people are more angry about their bills and, migration.
Of cost of living, NHS, these things, these are bread and butter issues.
Of course.
The Conservatives would love nothing more than to fight the next election on the 2019 election lines of Brexit and how they're the Brexit party, and they're just not going to be able to do that. And if they do, they might even lose on the terms they set.
Right, let's move to Labour, because obviously there's an election coming, general election coming. I just wonder whether Labour want to win, because Labour has a number of policies that made my eyes fall out this morning. Labour wants to give people the legal right to work from home, despite growing fears that obviously we have low productivity in this country and it's undermining the economic recovery. They've said, we need to make flexible working the default from day one for all workers, apart from where it's not reasonably feasible. Don't tell me you agree.
Why do you say despite Britain's productivity problem? It's because of Britain's productivity problem.
Because they're not working flexibly?
That is one of the many reasons, David, that you might sort of offer for Britain's productivity gap. And if there is any way, and I'm not an expert in labour laws or sort of productivity, but if there is any way that you could boost Britain's productivity by allowing flexible working, because not everyone can work to a 9-to-5 schedule. If you're wasting 2 hours of your day commuting that you could actually be spending behind your desk or doing something more productively, then let's hear about it. Let's even consider it. I think that this is not a Labour policy. This is a prospective policy for the manifesto.
This is an leaked 86-page policy handbook.
It's a leaked document, as I understand it, of policy discussions, things that they are discussing whether to put in the manifesto. And it might actually be a good idea.
But Sophia, the bit that I couldn't get, I understand flexible working is useful for some people in some industries, but at the same time, it's the default bit that I find really extraordinary. And actually, you've got the Conservatives. Actually, there's quite a sort of clear blue water between them. So the Conservatives are saying, actually, we need people in the office, Where do you sit on this?
I think it's a sign that Labour are betraying some of their working class roots. We forget that a lot of jobs cannot be done from home, and this presumption...
That's a brilliant point.
But they do say in the document that, unless it can't be.
Yes, I know, but it's
so apparently you can't actually be, you can't actually be a skilled worker in a, say, in a tin industry,
And it's a
but doing
brilliant
it at
point
home.
because actually it's a class thing, and
Absolutely.
blue-collar workers don't work from home because their job requires them to be there, and that's the Labour base, or it used to
But
be.
you can work flexibly. Why can't you work flexibly in a factory as well? I mean, why can't we actually apply these
We
across
should
the
be.
board?
Of course we should be working flexibly so that we can accommodate childcare and things like that. My worry, and I come at this from a perspective of being a doctor, is that people need people, Jonathan, and we need people to be social, and that the main part of our social life for many people is being at work, meeting your friends, having coffee, chatting over the water machine, and we have lost that, and people's mental health is suffering.
And that's a very good point. In terms of camaraderie, no Zoom call is the same as actually being with people, having a joke with people, understanding the team you work with. Here, it's great when we all get together.
And it's skewed also towards, I would say, those who are more established in their career. I think it's harder as a younger person coming into an office if everyone's working from home. You don't get those little tidbits of advice. You don't build those relationships.
Water cooler
which are-
moments.
Absolutely,
No,
which are
yeah,
really
I think-
important. So I think it is
it's really-
slightly
it's a good point.
kind of middle-class privilege lens. And also some people don't have the capacity to work from home. If you're in a house share, you're working and eating in your bedroom, that's not good for your mental health.
But it's not forcing anyone to. This is the
No,
point. I completely agree with your point as well.
Many people would go for it. But the other thing is that
That's
we're
their
not...
choice, though.
Yes, but people don't always make the right choices for them in terms of knowing how that's going to affect their mental health long term. They really don't.
Well, it might be also
watch
the
it.
fact is they don't pay for travel and they
Yeah.
decide to do it at home, and actually it may not be good for
There's
their mental
another
health.
effect here. Forget the people that are working from home. Think of all the small businesses which have gone under because nobody's coming into town, bringing in their dry cleaning, buying their sandwiches. And it's all very well saying, oh, they'll do that in their local community. When you're working from home, you don't pop down to your local sandwich shop to get your lunch. You walk to the fridge.
Yes, and I think it's also just really important that we remember, as you said, the mental health impacts of not working from home, but also, as you said, it's not just about your personal choice. You might say, I'm going to work from home, that's better for me, but that may not be better for the team that you work in. And I think that kind of idea of community responsibility.
Policies. The other one in the policy handbook, which I looked at aghast, is Labour wants it easier for unionised workers to take industrial action, as if we haven't had enough.
Well, look, I mean, the government is trying to make it harder to strike.
Isn't that the right thing?
No, it's not. I
No?
think that the right to strike is a fundamental Labour right. It's the right to strike that has got us many of the freedoms we take for granted today. Thanks to unions that we have a weekend. It's. I think that provided that you have a clear set of legal safeguards and sort of causes for a strike, to make sure that everything is legally done, then I don't see why it's bad to strike or to be able to
What
strike.
about dropping the Trade Union Act of 2016, introducing the higher threshold? So, for example, you need 50% of people to turn out. Surely all those things are good, because actually you can't have a minority dictating what happens and the way the public are then treated, can you?
How many what sort of proportion of the electorate voted for Brexit, David?
52%.
No, what proportion of the electorate?
You tell me.
It was about 30-something.
Yes, but right. So the point.
So should there have been a quorum?
You should be in favour of this.
Should there have been a quorum?
There should no, because we don't have mandates on the number that have to vote in any election.
Well, actually, that's not true, David. In the 1979 referendum on devolution, there was a 40% minimum of the electorate that had to be in support. That's why it failed.
Yeah, it's going terribly well. Your view on this in terms of making strike action easier? I think people around Britain would not like that.
I don't know how it could be made any easier, to be honest. I think, I mean, this policy document that has been leaked, but I think fairly kind of intentionally leaked, is fairly light on detail. So I'd be interested to see what their Labour policy is on how to make it easier. And I don't think the public in general are with making strikes easier. I think they make the difficult decision to support strikes sometimes, but I don't think they want them happening all the time.
I can't help feeling that these documents are deliberately leaked to actually test the waters and see how
Absolutely, of
people
course,
react.
that's politics.
Yeah, it is indeed, and that's a very good place to stop. That is indeed politics. Thank you very much indeed, Sophia. Very good to see you, Sophia Worringer and Jonathan Liss. And that was today's Head to Head.
Head to Head.